All right. Well, thank you, Mike, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here. Um, I've titled my talk Virtual to Real, kind of a tongue in cheek reference to the move from academia to industry. And in many ways, that is how I see the two realms, or at least the strengths of two realms. In academia, it's very much focused on ideas and on philosophy and spaces. And with industry, of course, there's more of an emphasis on systems and making these ideas real, particularly in the research, industrial research domain. So I thought what would be good is to start with a bit of discussion on my own journey from academia to industry. And I thought I'd spend most of my time talking about my time at CMU as faculty, and then later on as the transition was made to Facebook Reality Labs in 2015. But my story, of course, starts with my PhD. And I did my PhD in 2006 at the University of Central Florida. And of course, the university itself is not well known or highly ranked. But my advisor over there, Mubarak Shah, he managed to make a group. And what I found when I arrived there as a fresh graduate student was that he had systematically and very carefully selected his graduate students, and they were all of extraordinary capability. It was surprising and very fortunate for me to find that group and those people at that place. And I've had the privilege to work with and collaborate with some of the smartest people in the world in our area, at CMU, at Facebook, and with my collaborators across the country and the world. And I have to say that that group of people whom I interacted with at UCF at the beginning of my PhD, they ranked high in that group even. And this very sort of like a strong cohort, they were a very strong member of that too. And it's I mentioned this right at the start because I think this is one of the key lessons I've learned. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. I think it's an important one, and it's one of those heuristics that, in my view, actually works very well in terms of selecting career and selecting where to go and what to do. So I'll walk through my progress at Carnegie Mellon, the transition to the Facebook Reality Labs and founding those in Pittsburgh, and try to give you all a sense of not just the evolution of ideas, but my personal kind of like thinking about how to approach work, both in academia and in industry. So I was part of CMU and Facebook Reality Labs jointly from 2015 onwards. I ended my association with Carnegie Mellon in 2019. So I was joined between FRL and CMU between 2015 and 2019. But then once again, earlier last year, I rejoined as a consulting associate professor at the Robotics Institute. And this is a sort of an interesting position that Marshall Eber and others at CMU were kind enough to offer, and I was honored to accept. So beginning of my career, I worked a lot on a number of areas, very diverse clustering, background subtraction, structure for motion, non-rigid structure for motion. It was very diverse, and I found there to be a lot of value in exploring different areas. I didn't have a particular focus or particular specialty, published in machine learning, in graphics, and vision. And then I participated in an NSF expedition, which was focused on computational behavior. And the idea was that when people interact, they're signaling a lot with their facial expressions, hand gestures, body movements, and machines are blind to it. Machines don't perceive these in the same way I do, or you do, or any of us do, at least nowhere near the precision. But what was even more interesting than that was that even though all of us are able to perceive all of these signals, most of this perception is subconscious or below consciousness. So we find it very hard to describe, how people are moving, what we see in them, in words or consciously, but it's there. And so like there was a lack of scientific treatment of how people moved, their facial expressions, their body movements, hand gestures. And what struck me from that expedition, which was in collaboration with psychologists and sociologists and researchers in machine learning, audio, vision, was how inadequate our means of measuring movement and behavior actually were. And I'll give you an example over here. So this is a social game called Mafia. In it, there's a group of friends, and they have to guess who among them are part of the mafia secretly, purely based on no other cues except how they're behaving. And so in this one, the guy in the pink shirt randomly accuses the woman in the green jacket of being this mafia. And she denies it, but something in her denial triggers them to think that she is in fact part of the mafia. And I'll play this for you to see. So he says, Jess, I think you're the mafia. She's like, me? Why do you think it's me? And then independently, two people see something. They see something and they both say, you're not telling the truth. And I'll show you this from another angle and see if you can see what the guy in the green, pink shirt and the guy in the yellow shirt saw about her. So I'll play this once again. Same clip, different perspective. So he accuses her and she denies it in some way. And they both see that she's not telling the truth. And in fact, it was true. They were both correct. She was in fact the mafia. So if I ask you, like, in words, what did she do? Was it the way she smiled? Was it that she stepped back? I mean, probably all of you saw something there, but we struggle a lot to find words to describe what it was. So with that kind of insight, we started to build what I thought would be a system that could help us measure that movement for the first time at the level of granularity we had to. We have gross movements in terms of how our body moves, how our hand moves, how our head move. And we needed to build a system that could measure subtle face movement as well as the interpersonal dynamics, how people are standing with respect to one another. So what we did was something which I think in retrospect was quite crazy, which was to build this Panoptix Studio. It was a facility of about over 500 cameras. And at the start of this, I had very little background with sensors, with hardware, with electronics, I didn't know much about this, but I knew that this was, at least my intuition was, that we had to measure what we wanted to build. And I spent a lot of time learning how to do these, working with excellent collaborators who taught me how to build systems like this. And of course, I took inspiration from my mentors at CMU. Takeo Kanade, Ian Matthews, these folks had built things like this before for a different purpose, but they had built it. And that learning, that interaction sort of inspired me to build this with my students and collaborators as well. So this system had 480 VGA cameras, 32 HD cameras, and 10 Kinects, along with projectors in it as well. And if you want to see what this looked like, you walk in it, and it's this dome with cameras everywhere. And the reason for having cameras everywhere is occlusion. Like, we wanted to make sure that we could get people's facial expressions, body movements, and so on, no matter what they were doing in this space. And you could actually see it from every perspective as you see it over here. Many VGA views, HD views, and Kinect views as well. And in this space now, we could actually measure not just the facial expressions or hand gestures, but the subtle movements all over the person's body. Here you see hundreds of thousands of points being tracked as the guy swings the bat. This is Hanbul Ju, the student who did this work. And you can see it allows us to capture this sort of detail. So that was great, because now we could actually capture this movement. We could actually do this for several people. Actually, we showed. But the challenge was that these points, this motion was unregistered, meaning that there was no information about what the meaning of any point was. These points were unstructured point clouds. And this was another kind of learning, that until you register your representation, until it's registered somewhere, it's very hard to use it for anything useful. And that motivated work to see if we could actually identify key points like people were able to do for the face, if we could do that for the body as well. And working on it, it really didn't seem like there was much working at that point. And we really wanted to solve this problem and use it. And that was actually the motivation or the drive towards open pose and this entire kind of revolution of key point detection, that emerged as one of the most important working elements of vision systems right now. Like, you can actually reliably, surprisingly solve key point detection for diverse views, diverse appearances. And in my view, I believe the work that Ze, Thomas, Xian did was outstanding. But the critical reason why this problem was solved, I don't think was so much about our particular method. While it was excellent work, I think the real breakthrough was the MS COCO dataset. That was the first time that anyone had managed to annotate a large enough and diverse enough corpus of data at high enough quality. At that point, we were the first to show that it could be done in real time for multiple people, and nobody had seen anything like this before. But I do believe like the lion's share of the credit here goes to the folks who collected that data, made it available painstakingly. And this is a theme, of course, folks across computer vision, machine learning, audio recognize. Like collecting the right data and preparing it is oftentimes the thing that changes an area from being premature to mature. And you can see the result over here. Multiple people, this is from a single view. And then the power of the Panoptix Studio about having these multiple views emerged once you combine them from multiple different views. But here you see as well, this worked in the wild. Like this is a real-time system that Khinaz is showing over here. He's just scanning it. It turned out to be incredibly robust. You know, small, large scale, small scale, all happening in real time. And this was, I believe, back in 2016 or 17 that we showed this. Now we could actually apply this and extend this not just to the body, but to the face and the fingers as well. And this is really challenging because now we could actually do this detection at at least 2 or 3 levels of granularity and start to get some of that signal that people interact and send as they move about each other. Here you can see subtle hand movements, facial expressions coming out as well. We released this as open pose. And it's been, you know, starred 22,000 times, forked 6,600 times, and people from like all sorts of different academic disciplines, applications use it. And I, myself and my collaborators all get such a reward from, you know, seeing how diverse the use cases for this are, how people have managed to use it in such interesting and extraordinary ways. That's another thing. I mean, I feel like this is one of the best changes in the field in the last 10 years as well, is this kind of push towards making sure not just that you do the work, but you open sources as well. Now, one lesson over here was we had a research engineer join the group, Khinaz, who spent a lot of time making it useful and usable, answering questions, supporting it. This is another one that I would recommend. Like the intent of work should be to actually you know, affect and influence people in their own work. And the best way to do that is to support it, to make sure that what you build, what you release is actually usable, and then support people when they choose to use it. And people will get attracted to that, especially if what you build is in fact useful. And so here you see what happens when we take these key points and actually stabilize them across the many views you see inside the Panoptix Studio. Now suddenly what was jittery becomes very stable, and it's actually a good source of signal for how people are working. And this is Hanbulju's son and wife interacting inside the dome. Okay, but this is just the start. Key points were just the start for faces and the body. We wanted to get that subtle movement that you get from a complete representation. And then this was a follow-up work that we did to try to complete that and try to extract more of that signal from the face and the hands and the body. And this was the total capture paper at CVPR 2018. Sorry. And now for the first time, we were able to actually extract facial expressions, hand gestures, body movements from multiple people at a time, and start to analyze what that you know, we were able to measure for the first time, the signaling happening between people, actually how it's happening in terms of numbers. And that, you know, affords a sort of scientific analysis of how people are interacting. Now, that was my journey at CMU, and I wanted to kind of like pose this in a way that exposes the fact that we weren't kind of trying to, you know, just rush towards paper and you know, problems and try to solve them. It wasn't that we solved open pose in isolation from total capture or building the Panoptix Studio. These things were all done with the intent of solving this and understanding this idea of how people interact. That was the motivation. We were motivated on a journey to actually understand and solve the scientific problem. And these papers and these artifacts were side products of that journey. I want to kind of like underline that point a little bit. Of course, there are many papers myself and my students pursued out of interest as well, without doubt. But the core theme, the core kind of like arc of work was driven in this desire to try to understand numerically how people behave and interact when they're in groups, from their faces, hands, and bodies. Now, in 2014, Oculus, a VR company, was acquired by Facebook. And Michael Abrash was tasked with the goal of creating an Oculus research lab. And he approached me in 2015 to join and start a group in Pittsburgh. And I was actually, when he first approached me, I tried to just couch it in the work that I was doing before. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that AR and VR actually present like a very unique opportunity for the sort of work that I'm doing. And I'll explain why and how we started this. So the core idea is, when people are interacting with one another, we're communicating just like any network. I'm sending signals to you, you're receiving them, you're responding. Well, in this case, it's just me sending signals out because I can't see any of you. But if we were in a hall together, that's what it would be like. And that's kind of the problem, right? Despite the progression of tools, video conferencing right now is a very poor substitute to being in person with a crowd. If I was there in person with you at ICCV, my experience, at least I'll tell you, would have been very different. I'm sure it would be different for you as well, as I could see your face, you could see me looking at you. That interaction is missing. So that's in fact the goal of our lab and our work at FRL Pittsburgh. It's to see if we can create technology that would allow us to have an interaction in VR that is indistinguishable from a real one, as we would have if we were in person together. And so this was an early result that we showed, 2019. You can see here I'm wearing a headset, Danny is wearing a headset, and I'll play this and you'll see, obviously this is a 2D video, but what I saw was Danny in 3D, what Danny saw was me in 3D, and I'll let you watch this.
What can your face do? Can you show us?
Well, I've always hoped you would ask me that question. So I have some pretty good, I think, mouth movement.
How about your eyes? Can you look left, right, up, down? Good.
Yeah, I'm gonna be surprised. Ooh. I think one of my favorites is puffing my cheeks.
And so we go on, and you get the idea. The intent, like the overall long-term goal right now, is to be able to measure those movements in a way that we can faithfully reproduce them at the other side. Not just for the face, but for the body, for the hands, everything. That's the ultimate kind of mission that we're on, building upon the mission that, it's a pivot, but it's building upon the mission that we had at the lab at CMU. And the core kind of innovation that we've produced is pioneering some of the pioneering work in neural rendering for avatars, now for audio and for spaces as well. So this is a result in 2018. Well, this is a 2019 paper, but it's based on the 2018 work by Stephen Lombardi as well, and I'll let you watch this. Whoops.
Hi, my name is Steve Lombardi. For those that don't know me, I'm a researcher at the Pittsburgh lab working on codec avatars. The goal of our work in Pittsburgh is to create a system that enables social experiences in VR and AR, just as you would have them in real life.
So the idea over here was to start to use neural networks, the revolution in deep learning, to help us produce photorealistic avatars that can be driven in real time. And this was allowed by, again, lessons learned in CMU with the Panoptix Studio. We built this system called Mugsy. Now this has 171 high resolution, high frame rate cameras, 11 megapixels, compared to closer to 2 megapixels that we had with the cameras at CMU and VGA cameras. So this was much higher resolution, much higher frame rate. It was a much more data productive system than the previous one. And in fact, right now at the center of the space is probably the most densely sensed volume in the world. And with this data, you could actually see, not just what the person's face was doing from every direction, but in fact, at a level of detail. You could actually see what he had for dinner or lunch. And we built a pipeline around this once again to try to get registered, high fidelity information about how the face is moving. Reconstruction, key point detection, and then mesh tracking, and then finally learning this decoder from it. To give you an idea of like the precision, this is kind of like the reconstruction, frame by frame reconstruction. This is movement. This is how precisely we could get movement. This is the side of the person's face. And key point detection at a level of detail, probably we've at least never attempted. I've not seen anywhere else, like how detailed the annotations we have of the face. Now, even with this sort of registered model, we were unable to model things like hair, well, glasses, and that inspired Stephen and Jason Saragi to come up with this idea of neural volumes. And this is a precursor to the NERF revolution in rendering. And if you haven't read the paper, I would strongly encourage you to read it. It's a really, if I may say so, it's an interesting and it sort of sparked this direction with a couple of other papers as well in the area. And this let us sort of model things like hair, different types of hair even quite well for these avatars that we were building. We've continued to try to get detail from the rest of the body in terms of hand movement. And you can see like the emphasis on precision. We want to get subtleties right. We want to get what the person is actually doing right. Even with hair, you can see the hair tracking work we did in 2019 can reproduce not just how the hair is structured or make it look right. It actually is strand by strand accurate. That was the goal. We want to see how people are actually moving, because signaling and exchange, it's important that we preserve the fidelity of the signal. I don't want, because of our systems, that we lose what you're trying to send when you're communicating with someone else or when you're receiving information from someone else either. And then finally, of course, we want these avatars to sit in a space, so they should be relightable as well, also through neural rendering methods. You can see over here, this is a recent result where we can render through neural rendering at very nice, good resolution and detail. Now, this was faces and hands that I showed. We also wanted to get the rest of the body. So we built another system which was larger and able to actually see what the person is doing inside the space. So this was the Socio Optic, and I'll play a quick video for you to get a sense of what it is. So this has 250 cameras, again at high resolution, and it allows us to be able to build, something of this sort. So you can see the avatar.
Hi, I'm standing in the Socio Optic, a dome containing 180 cameras, 1,600 microphones capturing about 180 gigabytes of data per second.
So we have key points, we have reconstruction, we have the same mesh tracking at high resolution, and in the end, texture mapping, and we actually have the full avatar pipeline in here as well. And one of the key kind of like goals here is to try to get these very difficult poses where you intersect, you have contact, very common in the real world, almost impossible to get. So whenever you see body capture results at your vision conferences, see how much contact they actually have. That's the real challenge with bodies. Your hands, if you look at where they are right now, likely they're not free floating in space. They're either on another hand or they're on some surface. We're constantly kind of like resting on ourselves. And so this is a really important and difficult, in my view, open challenge in this area. And then finally, we're able to get these inside VR as well and see them, actually in 3D. It's quite an experience to see this, and I hope soon all of you will be able to share and see some of these results that we've been able to get. The last thing I'll talk about is audio. And we've built the system to actually also capture audio, because communication happens not just visually, but audio as well. So this system actually, the Socio Opticon, has about 1,700 microphones in their audio channels as well. And we're able to reproduce the sound field precisely too. So what you see over here is what one of these microphones produces. Again, with the intent of addressing that goal of communication. So you see this.
This is a construct. It's our loading program. We can load anything from clothing to equipment, weapons, training simulation, anything.
And so he snaps his fingers, and you can see we can actually track how that wave emanates in 3D. And no matter where you are in the space, we can render what it would sound like from that space for you. And it gives a sense of immersion that you get because your visual and audio sensations are both matched. And this was something which we pioneered last year with this work on binaural neural rendering. So this is neural rendering for audio as well. And it's not an accident that we're pursuing this for vision, for audio, for spaces, because the representations need to be not just accurate and efficient, but they need to be compatible with one another. The avatar, the space, and the environment interact together in a way. And this is really what motivated the work to pursue it from all of these three directions. You can see here the result. Okay, so this is where we are right now with our work. If you look at it from a macro perspective, the abstract, philosophical, scientific goal of trying to understand human behavior, That's really what motivated work at CMU. But like to me, a very important application of this, perhaps the most important application, is allowing people to better communicate with one another. First because of distance, but later because of other things as well. And that's what we started to pursue and have been pursuing at FRL in Pittsburgh. And we continue to pursue that. So I'll end with three lessons I've learned. Well, three of the lessons I've learned. The first one is make sure you surround yourself with smart people. Like when you're thinking about where to go, like there's of course the location, there is the reputation of the institution, there are all these other things that you might think about, where your friends are. I think one thing which I would strongly encourage you to rank very highly, in my view, perhaps the highest thing to rank early in your career, is to make sure you surround yourself with smart. I've had the privilege to work with like an extraordinary selection of students. And I honestly would say, and I'm not being sort of like self-deprecating, I am certain I've learned more from them than they learned from me. And as they've grown, I've grown with them. With each one, as they've grown, I've grown with them as well. And that's been like a real privilege for me. The second, this is the group at Facebook Reality Labs. This is a slightly older picture. There are now a lot more people, and my experience was the same. Unlike CMU, where it was primarily graduate students, here I've had the privilege to interact with research engineers, managers, software engineers, hardware, mechanical and electrical engineers. And it's broadened my perspective on what tools one has to solve problems in a way that I've never had before. And that's been extremely rewarding and enriching. The second one is to solve problems, not papers. I think one of the, maybe strongly call diseases in academia sometimes is the pursuit of papers. You see these posts which say, I've published 5 papers at this conference or 10 papers at that conference. I feel like this is entirely backwards. The intent of research should be to solve problems. And once you have something to contribute, make sure you write it up. Make sure you share it with the community. But the goal is not papers. The goal is not a venue. The goal has to be passionate about solving an actual important scientific problem. That should be the motivation. It may sound idealistic, but I have found this to be a very good sift between the most accomplished researchers and the ones who are kind of not as much. And then finally, in my view, find yourself a mentor early. I think I've been very useful. I've been very sort of lucky in this regard. And my perhaps heuristic on this is that strong mentors gravitate towards useful people. So make yourself useful. I had that privilege at UCF with Mubarak and his group, at CMU with Takeo and Jessica and the rest of the folks that I interacted with, and finally at Facebook Reality Labs as well. This is something which I've placed in 2 of my lessons learned, is smart people matter. There is a multiplicative effect when you get good people together. It's not additive. They bounce ideas off each other, they challenge each other, they inspire each other in ways that it's kind of unintuitive how strong that effect is. And I've seen this again and again in my personal observation in other groups as well. So with that, I'll end my slide with gratitude for my mentors, my collaborators and students. And I really do believe that that's what makes me and others what they are. So with that, I'll end, and I'm happy to take questions and engage in discussion.